I think there is something lacking within the international thinking. They need to look at all these governments, Saudi Arabia, whatever. And I always say my own government, Uganda, these dictators need all to be told, time has come now.
But they need to be told so by their own people.
Yeah, ultimately, it will be their own people to rise up.
The catches we keep returning to is when they are told so by their own people. I mean, one of the lessons you could have learned in the past couple of weeks is the tougher you are and the meaner you are with your own people, the more likely you are to hold on to your palaces and your wealth.
Well, again, I think we're slightly misreading what's happening in Libya because, as I said, it's not the Facebook revolution we've seen across the Middle East, and that's one of the mistakes that President Sarkozy made. He said in confidence to one of his aides that he thought Libya was a Facebook revolution. Somebody should have told him that Facebook doesn't work in Libya, and it's not the same situation. And we don't know what's the scale of the rebellion. If it's a majority, if it's a minority. It seems to be a minority, and it's an armed group. So is it legitimate for the West to get rid of someone because a minority of armed people are challenging him for all the legitimate reasons, but they have failed effectively? So is it the job of the West to get rid of Gaddafi?
Well, we will see. Now, I want to move on because the full horror of what's happened to the people of Japan is emerging very slowly. But as we contemplate the humanitarian catastrophe, there are also implications about the future of nuclear power, with governments from Beijing to Berlin talking of reviews and possible policy changes. Will one consequence be to set back the nuclear power industry for years? And if it does, what are the consequences? Ned, you lived in Japan for a while, didn't you?
I did for a year.
And did people feel, I mean, I've talked to quite a few Japanese people who said that, we've always expected this in a way. We've always kind of been prepared in our head, in our psychology for some catastrophe like this.
I think, I lived there many years ago, but I think that's true to an extent. And that although I lived there in the mid-'70s, there was still this shadow of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the sense, particularly where nuclear issues was concerned, of a kind of national ongoing minute of silence. That there was always, these were the islands where this weapon was used, and the whole nuclear issue was not theoretical for Japanese. It is psychologically embedded in Japan. And yet, on the other hand, you have this paradox, because it's a successful advanced economy, like all advanced economies in the world, where they understand the logical argument for nuclear power as an energy source, particularly given environmental constraints on carbon use, and so I guess they expected. I guess they feared this could happen. I don't think even in Japan they expected this would happen. Certainly because there's another psychological stream, if you will, and that is things in Japan are. I mean, in the Japanese, they work.
Japan works
basically, and one of the fascinating and I think one of the reasons that initially the coverage was. Of this terrible earthquake was less complete and less accurate than it might have been in the very early stages, was everybody assumes that all of Japan is either Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka. There is a more kind of remote, rural Japan of which this is a part, where it's tougher to get information in and out, and quite frankly, people know less about.
Stryker, people are now saying, in nuclear terms, it's worse than 3 Mile Island, and there's not been a single nuclear power plant commissioned in the United States since 3 Mile Island. Is that right? Something like that.
Something like that.
But I mean,
there have been a lot commissioned in a lot of other places.
A lot of other places. Although, as we know this week, China, Germany, other countries are looking again at different aspects of their policy and what to do. So, I mean, do you think this is going to set back those who thought that now they had won some of the environmental arguments because of carbon, and that we were going to have in this country, for example, new build nuclear power?
Well, it definitely will set it back. I think the real question is for how long. But it will set it back. I mean, you can see them. They're all running for cover, all the people who support nuclear energy. And yet there is, there are, as you say, there are logical arguments in favor of nuclear power. However, you can't separate nuclear power from from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I mean, it's in everybody's.
The only thing I would say, I would make the argument, which no doubt the industry will make before too long, and that is the argument shouldn't be nuclear power or not nuclear power, but nuclear reactor design. And basically, I don't think we'll see. The one thing I would say very quickly is there was this trend to kind of refurbish old nuclear power stations to save money. I think that's done.
I think the horror of this is perhaps even much more than the tragedy it has caused in Japan. People need to start thinking, if Japan, that is supposed to be most equipped, best place to deal with such a tragedy of nuclear, science, is in total meltdown and chaos in terms of, you can see they're using very basic ways trying to pour water on this thing like that, then how about other countries? So many other countries, Iran, South Africa, and so on, are trying to get all these nuclear things. Many African countries want to get those things. I think that this takes us back to, say, nuclear weapons. Human beings were very good at creating advanced science, but nobody knew what would happen if, for example, those nuclear weapons were used. We need to start thinking, if we want to advance in science, have also thoughts about how we deal with those things.
I mean, one part of the argument will be, and we've seen these two huge, terrible news stories this week. If you don't have nuclear power, you have to perhaps rely on oil being pumped from places like Libya and Saudi Arabia and so on, where you then have to deal with whoever's in power. And that's a problem.
But that's why, going back to Libya, 80 to 85% of the oil supplies of Europe comes from Libya. So that's
Well, it does explain why people might have holidays there, or have associations with it, or have grants to their universities, as we see from distinguished institutions here. But I mean, that is the dilemma. Do we want, to take Britain's case, do we want gas to come from Russia? Is that going to, when would they turn off the taps? Do we want oil from Libya or elsewhere? Or do we want nuclear power stations when we're not in an earthquake zone, so perhaps they're safer here?
Well, there are very strong concerns in Europe in particular, where anti-nuclear groups have called for referendums about the continuing use of atomic reactors. And leading the campaign is the French MEP Daniel Cohn-Bendit, and anti-nuclear groups like Sortir du Nucléaire, literally get out of nuclear, where it raises the questions of the safety of those plants, and also in countries like France, where 75% of energy is nuclear, and France runs 58, for example. It has 58 reactors in France, and the state-controlled company Électricité de France, EDF, is planning to open other plants in Britain, but also in Italy, and that is the concern.
Do you think, we only have 30 seconds left, Stryker, do you think it's inevitable then that nuclear will be part of the mix despite what's happening in Japan?
Over the long term?
Over the long term,
yes.
Yeah. And you think
absolutely.
So? You think so? For this country? And
very much so.
I think
especially when it's very close to urban, centres, but also, we have legitimate reasons to be fearful of anything, including terrorism.
I think we need to know how to deal with consequences or tragedies like this when they happen. We are not thinking about that. Really,
we'll leave it there. That's it for Dateline London for this week. We'll be back next week at the same time. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.